Sherlock Holmes and the Case of Murder on the Last Carriage. Chapter 1. The Passenger Who Never Arrived. In all my years beside Sherlock Holmes, I encountered many crimes that strained the limits of reason. Some involved impossible disappearances, others elaborate frauds or murders concealed beneath layers of deception. Yet few cases remained in my memory with such singular clarity as the affair which Holmes later named the Case of Murder on the Last Carriage. It began during the final days of October in the year 1894. London was wrapped in one of those dense autumn fogs that seemed less a natural phenomenon than a living creature. The gas lamps along Baker Street glowed like distant stars imprisoned behind yellow clouds. The air smelled of coal smoke and damp stone, and the muffled rumble of carriage wheels echoed endlessly through the darkness. I had spent the evening reading by the fire, while Holmes occupied himself upon the violin. His long, thin frame reclined upon the sofa, his eyes half closed as he drew from the instrument a melancholy melody that drifted through our sitting room. Without warning, he ceased playing. "The man approaching our door," said he, "is burdened by both anxiety and responsibility." I glanced toward the curtained window. "You can see someone through that fog?" "I cannot see him at all." "Then how?" "The footsteps, my dear Watson." I listened. Indeed, faint steps approached along Baker Street. Holmes smiled, heavy but measured. A man accustomed to authority. He pauses every 12 paces, a habit of deliberation. Yet his pace increases near our door, suggesting urgency. There is also the distinct sound of a walking stick striking stone. Oak, not ash. Before I could formulate a reply, Mrs. Hudson announced a visitor. The door opened. A stout gentleman entered carrying a dark overcoat glistening with moisture. His silver hair was neatly combed. In one hand he held an oak cane. I confess I stared openly. Holmes merely gestured toward a chair. "Pray sit down, Inspector." The man blinked. "You know me?" "I know that you are an inspector attached to the Railway Division of Scotland Yard. Your boots carry traces of red clay from the Euston freight yards. The brass button on your sleeve bears the insignia of railway administration, and your expression suggests a problem severe enough to bring you here personally." The visitor gave a low whistle. "Remarkable." "My friend," said I, "has a distressing habit of being remarkable." The inspector introduced himself as Inspector Harold Finch. His face was grave. "I've come regarding a death." Holmes leaned forward. "A murder?" "We're not certain." Holmes's eyes brightened instantly. The inspector continued, "Which is precisely the problem." He removed a leather folder and placed several photographs upon the table. "What do you make of those?" The images depicted the interior of a railway carriage. I moved closer. The compartment appeared ordinary enough. Upholstered seats, luggage racks, a narrow aisle. Yet something immediately caught my attention. A man sat motionless beside the window. Even in the photograph he looked unnaturally still, dead. "The victim?" I asked. Finch nodded. His name was Edwin Mercer, 47 years old, merchant and investor, well known in financial circles. "Cause of death?" Holmes asked. "Unknown." That answer seemed to surprise even Holmes. The inspector continued. "The body was discovered yesterday morning aboard the last passenger carriage of the midnight train arriving from York." "The last carriage?" Holmes repeated. "Exactly." "Who found him?" "A porter." "And the circumstances?" Finch folded his hands. "The train departed York at 11:20 p.m. Numerous passengers occupied the forward carriages. However, only 3 passengers were recorded in the last carriage." Holmes listened silently. "The first disembarked at Peterborough, the second at Huntingdon. Mercer was supposedly the final passenger remaining." "Supposedly," said Holmes. "The conductor never saw him leave." I felt a chill despite the warmth of the fire. "You mean," I said, "he remained in the carriage the entire journey?" "Apparently so." "And nobody noticed?" Finch shook his head. The carriage was detached after arrival and moved to a maintenance siding. When was the body discovered? Nearly 4 hours later. Holmes steepled his fingers. What makes the matter extraordinary? The inspector hesitated. There were no wounds, no poison, none detected, no signs of struggle, none. Holmes rose immediately and crossed to the window. I knew that posture well. His mind had awakened. And yet, said he softly, you believe he was murdered. We do. Why? Finch reached into the folder once more. This time he produced a small object wrapped carefully in cloth. He unfolded it upon the table. It was a silver pocket watch, nothing unusual at first glance. Then I noticed the hands. Both had stopped. At precisely 12:17, Holmes turned sharply. The victim's watch. Yes. And? It was found clenched in his hand. Still I failed to understand. Finch lowered his voice. There is one more detail. Proceed. The watch was manufactured only 6 months ago. Holmes nodded impatiently. What of it? The mechanism was inspected. And? It had been deliberately stopped. Silence filled the room. Even the fire seemed quieter. Holmes stared at the watch. Interesting. The inspector leaned forward. That isn't the strange part. Holmes raised an eyebrow. No? Finch swallowed. When the watchmaker examined it, he discovered a tiny scrap of paper hidden inside the casing. The inspector withdrew an evidence envelope. Within rested a narrow strip of folded paper. Holmes carefully opened it. Upon the paper appeared 6 handwritten words. I still remember them perfectly. The killer left before midnight. For perhaps 10 seconds nobody spoke. The crackling fire became the only sound in Baker Street. At last Holmes smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Rather, it was the expression that appeared whenever he encountered a puzzle worthy of his abilities. A dead man, he murmured. Yes. A message hidden inside a watch. Correct. A victim discovered after midnight. Indeed, Holmes's eyes gleamed. And a killer who supposedly departed before the murder occurred. Inspector Finch nodded grimly. Exactly. Holmes turned toward me. Watson. Yes? I believe Baker Street shall be occupied tomorrow. You intend to take the case? My dear fellow, said Holmes, reaching for his coat. I accepted it the moment I heard the words last carriage. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a silent audience. Somewhere beyond that darkness lay a railway carriage, a dead financier, and a message that defied all logic. At the time, neither I nor Inspector Finch could have imagined that the truth would lead us through aristocratic drawing rooms, abandoned signal towers, hidden debts, false identities, and a conspiracy whose roots stretched back more than 20 years. Nor could we know that before the case ended, another man would die, and that the murderer had already begun watching Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 2. The Empty Compartment. The following morning dawned grey and damp, though the sun itself remained hidden behind a veil of fog that seemed reluctant to surrender its hold upon London. Holmes was unusually energetic. By 8 o'clock he had consumed 2 cups of coffee, filled 3 pages of notes, and dispatched a series of telegrams whose contents he declined to share with me. At 9:30, Inspector Finch arrived precisely on time. You have not wasted the morning, I trust? Said Holmes. The inspector smiled faintly. I suspected you might ask that. He handed over a folded document. The passenger list. Holmes scanned it rapidly. What do you see? I asked. Only that one name interests me considerably more than the others. Naturally, he refused to elaborate. An hour later we found ourselves at King's Cross Station, where the detached railway carriage had been secured within a maintenance yard. The structure stood alone upon a side track. It appeared utterly ordinary. Indeed, had I passed it on any other day, I would have given it no more attention than a lamp-post or fence. Yet inside that modest compartment sat the answer to a murder, and perhaps, as Holmes suspected, to several mysteries besides. A railway superintendent greeted us at the gate. His name was Mr. Arthur Bellamy, a nervous man whose spectacles seemed perpetually in danger of sliding from his nose. "The carriage has not been touched since yesterday," he assured Holmes. "Excellent. You believe the solution remains inside?" Holmes smiled. "My dear sir, every solution remains somewhere. The challenge is discovering where." The superintendent appeared uncertain whether this was wisdom or nonsense. Holmes entered the carriage. I followed immediately. The compartment was surprisingly comfortable. Rich burgundy upholstery lined the seats. Brass fittings gleamed along the luggage racks. Heavy curtains framed the windows. At first glance, nothing appeared disturbed. No overturned luggage. No broken glass. No signs of violence. Nothing. Holmes stood motionless for nearly a minute. He often did this at crime scenes. Many observers mistook it for inactivity. In reality, it represented the most intense stage of his investigation. His eyes moved constantly. Every inch of the compartment received examination. Every shadow, every stain, every imperfection. Finally, he spoke. Curious. Inspector Finch looked hopeful. "What is?" Holmes pointed toward the floor. "There." I looked down. A small scratch marked the wooden panelling near the entrance. "It seems insignificant," said Finch. "Most important things do." Holmes knelt. The scratch measured perhaps 2 inches in length. It had been made recently. That much was obvious. The exposed wood remained pale beneath the varnish. "What caused it?" I asked. "Something metallic. A shoe buckle? No. A cane? No. Then what?" Holmes produced a magnifying lens. The object possessed a narrow edge. He studied the mark. Furthermore, it was dragged rather than struck. Finch frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means someone moved something heavy through this doorway." The inspector looked around. "The victim? Possibly. Or luggage? Possibly." Holmes rose. "But not recently enough." That answer only deepened our confusion. The superintendent shifted uneasily. "You believe something was removed?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he examined the overhead luggage rack. There he discovered a second anomaly. A faint layer of dust covered most surfaces. Most. One section remained perfectly clean. A rectangular section, approximately 18 inches wide. Holmes smiled. "Ah, you found something?" I asked. "Indeed." He indicated the dust pattern. "Observe." I leaned closer. The outline became immediately apparent. Something rectangular had rested there for an extended period. Then it had been removed. "What sort of object?" Finch asked. "A box, perhaps." "Mercer's luggage?" "Perhaps." The inspector consulted his notes. No luggage belonging to the victim was recovered. Holmes turned sharply. "None." "Nothing. Interesting." He moved farther into the compartment. The victim's seat remained exactly as it had been found. Mercer had occupied the position nearest the rear window. According to photographs, his body had remained upright, almost peaceful. No signs of distress, no visible injury, no evidence of struggle. Death had arrived quietly. Too quietly. Holmes lowered himself into the same seat. He gazed through the window. Several minutes passed. Then suddenly he leaned forward. "Watson." "Yes? What do you see?" I followed his gaze. "Railway tracks, signal posts, factory chimneys. Nothing unusual. I see a maintenance yard." "No." He tapped the glass. "Look farther." Beyond the tracks stood a row of warehouses. One building immediately attracted my attention. Unlike the others, it possessed an elevated platform overlooking the railway lines. "What of it?" I asked. Holmes nodded. "Precisely." Inspector Finch looked puzzled. "I don't understand." "You are not meant to, not yet." He rose. We continued our examination. For nearly an hour, Holmes inspected every corner of the carriage. Then he made a discovery that transformed the investigation. It occurred near the rear door. A tiny object had become lodged between two floorboards, so small that I nearly missed it. Holmes extracted it carefully with a penknife. The object rested in his palm. A button, black, plain, apparently unremarkable, yet Holmes studied it with intense interest. "A uniform button," he said. The inspector looked surprised. "Railway staff? No. Military? No. Then whose?" Holmes handed it over. The inspector examined it. A moment later his expression changed. "Good heavens! What is it?" I asked. "The button belongs to a morning coat." Holmes nodded. "Exactly. Victorian morning attire often employed distinctive black buttons. Such garments were worn following a death within the family." "Can it be traced?" Holmes asked. The inspector considered. "Possibly." "Then do so immediately." Finch pocketed the evidence. Holmes meanwhile returned to Mercer's seat. Once again he stared through the window. His expression grew increasingly thoughtful. At last he addressed the superintendent. "Mr. Bellamy." "Yes? Who cleaned this carriage last?" The man blinked. "Cleaned it? Yes. It was serviced 3 days before the journey." "By whom?" "A maintenance worker named George Henshaw. Bring me his records." The superintendent departed. When he had gone, I turned to Holmes. "What are you thinking?" He smiled faintly. "I am thinking about absence." "Absence? The most overlooked form of evidence." I waited. Holmes continued. "Everyone focuses upon what is present. The body. The watch. The message." He nodded. "Precisely. What interests me is what should be present but is not." I considered this. The missing luggage. One example. The missing weapon. Another. The missing witness. Holmes's eyes flashed. "Excellent, Watson." Inspector Finch looked between us. "Witness." Holmes folded his arms. "The last carriage contained 3 passengers." "Correct. 1 left at Peterborough." "Yes." "1 left at Huntingdon." "Yes." "And Mercer remained aboard." The inspector nodded. Holmes smiled. "Then why has nobody yet spoken with the 2nd passenger?" A stunned silence followed. Finch's face paled. "My God, exactly. You mean, the investigation has focused entirely upon the dead man." Holmes walked slowly toward the door. "Yet the final passenger may be the most important person in the entire case." Finch immediately produced a notebook. "I'll find him." "Please do." The inspector hurried away. For several moments Holmes watched him disappear across the yard. Then he turned back toward the carriage. His gaze settled upon the rear window. The smile vanished from his face. "What is it?" I asked. Holmes spoke quietly. So what?" He pointed toward the glass. There, barely visible in the corner, someone had traced a mark with a fingertip. The moisture had long since dried, yet the shape remained faintly visible, a simple symbol, 3 intersecting lines forming a small triangle. Nothing more, nothing less. Holmes stared at it for several seconds, and for the first time since accepting the case, I observed genuine concern upon his features. "That," he said softly, "changes everything." "What does it mean?" He looked at me. "I was hoping, Watson, that you might tell me." I could not, nor, as events soon proved, could anyone else. Not yet. Chapter 3. The Passenger from Huntingdon. The discovery of the strange triangular symbol lingered in my thoughts throughout the remainder of that day. Though Holmes revealed little, I could tell the mark had disturbed him more than any other clue thus far uncovered. Such moments were rare. Ordinarily, Holmes greeted the bizarre with enthusiasm. He delighted in puzzles that baffled ordinary minds. Yet this particular symbol seemed to awaken not curiosity but caution. When I questioned him during our return to Baker Street, he merely replied, "A clue may tell us what happened, Watson. Occasionally it tells us who wishes us not to discover what happened." I pressed him no further. By late afternoon, Inspector Finch returned with news. His face bore the expression of a man carrying both success and disappointment. "You were correct," he announced. Holmes looked up from a chemical experiment. Naturally. We located the second passenger. And? His name is Lionel Graves. Occupation? Solicitor. Holmes immediately abandoned his experiment. Interesting. I thought you might say so. Where is he? Waiting downstairs. Within moments, Mrs. Hudson escorted the visitor into our sitting room. Mr. Lionel Graves appeared to be a gentleman of approximately 50 years. His clothing was neat, his manner restrained, and his features possessed the weary look of a man accustomed to dealing with difficult clients. Yet something about him seemed unsettled. He removed his hat and sat cautiously. "You wished to see me?" he asked. Holmes studied him silently. A full 10 seconds passed before he spoke. "You are frightened, Mr. Graves." The solicitor stiffened. "No. Yes, I assure you. You have checked the window twice since entering. You selected a chair facing the door. Your gloves show signs of nervous twisting. Furthermore, your pulse is visibly elevated." Graves swallowed. "I may be somewhat concerned. About the murder?" The solicitor hesitated. "No." That answer instantly captured Holmes's attention. "No," he repeated. "I had no connection to Mr. Mercer's death. Then what concerns you?" Graves lowered his voice. "I fear that speaking with you may place me in danger." The room fell silent. Inspector Finch exchanged a glance with me. Holmes folded his hands. "Now we are making progress." Graves looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I did not wish to become involved." "Unfortunately," said Holmes, "events rarely consult our wishes." The solicitor gave a weary sigh. "Very well." He leaned forward. "I boarded the train at York." "As scheduled?" Holmes asked. "Yes." "And occupied the last carriage?" "I did." "Were you acquainted with Edwin Mercer?" "No." "Did you speak with him?" "Briefly." Holmes nodded. "Describe him." Graves considered. "He seemed distracted. Nervous. Perhaps. Afraid." The solicitor hesitated. "Yes." That single word instantly sharpened Holmes's attention. "Continue." He checked his watch repeatedly. "The same watch later found in his hand." "I assume so." "He appeared to be expecting someone." "How can you tell?" "Because he kept looking toward the door." Graves shifted uneasily. Every few minutes he would glance up as though waiting for another passenger. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. The observation was significant. "Did anyone join him?" Holmes asked. "No." "Are you certain?" "Absolutely." "What happened next?" "I left at Huntingdon. Before leaving, did anything unusual occur?" The solicitor became silent. For several moments he stared at the floor. Then he spoke. "Yes." Holmes leaned forward. "What?" "I heard an argument." Inspector Finch immediately produced his notebook. "Between whom?" "Mr. Mercer and another man." The inspector looked astonished. "But you said nobody entered the carriage." "No one did." "Then how?" The voice came from the adjoining compartment. A curious development. Victorian railway carriages often contained neighbouring compartments separated by thin walls. Conversation could sometimes be overheard. "What was said?" Holmes asked. Graves frowned. "I heard only fragments." "Repeat them." The solicitor closed his eyes. "You promised." "What else?" "Too late now." "And you should never have returned." Holmes remained perfectly still. "Anything further?" "One final sentence." "What was it?" Graves opened his eyes. The voice said, "The debt must be paid." The room grew quiet. Even Inspector Finch seemed troubled. "A threat?" I suggested. "Possibly," said Holmes. He turned back to Graves. "Did Mercer respond?" "Yes." "What did he say?" The solicitor hesitated. He seemed frightened. His exact words, "You don't understand what happened." Holmes nodded slowly. And then, silence. Nothing more. "No." "Did you recognize the second voice?" "Never heard it before." "Male?" "Definitely." "Young?" "Middle-aged, perhaps." Holmes stood and began pacing. I recognized the signs. His mind was rapidly assembling possibilities. "Mr. Graves," he said suddenly, "why did you withhold this information?" The solicitor looked embarrassed. "I thought it irrelevant." "No." Graves looked away. Holmes stopped pacing. "You lied." The solicitor's face paled. You did not withhold the information because it seemed irrelevant. Silence. You withheld it because you feared someone. The man lowered his head. At length he nodded. Yes. Inspector Finch frowned. Who? Graves looked toward the window. I don't know. That is impossible. I wish it were. The solicitor drew a folded paper from his pocket. I received this yesterday. He handed it to Holmes. The note contained only 6 words. Forget the train or regret it. No signature, no explanation, nothing else. Inspector Finch cursed softly. A threat. Indeed, said Holmes. When did this arrive? This morning. Holmes examined the paper carefully. Then he surprised us all. This was hand-delivered. Graves blinked. How can you know? The fold pattern, he pointed. A messenger carried it inside a coat pocket for several hours. The solicitor stared. Remarkable. Not particularly. Holmes turned to Finch. Have officers protect Mr. Graves. Immediately. The solicitor visibly relaxed. Yet Holmes seemed more troubled than before. After Graves departed, we remained in Baker Street discussing the interview. Inspector Finch was convinced the argument represented the key to the case. I largely agreed. Holmes, however, remained unconvinced. There is something wrong. With the testimony? I asked. No. The threat? No. The argument? No. I sighed. Then what? Holmes stood by the fire. The timing. What about it? He picked up the passenger manifest. According to railway records, the adjoining compartment was empty. Inspector Finch stared. Empty? Entirely. A silence followed. I felt a cold sensation creep along my spine. Then whose voice did Graves hear? Excellent question. Finch frowned. Perhaps the records are incorrect. Possible. Or someone boarded without a ticket. Also possible. But unlikely. Holmes nodded. Very. The inspector looked troubled. We're back where we started. Not quite. Holmes crossed to his desk. There he retrieved a city map. What are you doing? I asked. Looking for connections. Between whom? Mercer. He pointed to a location. Graves. A second mark. Then another. The railway maintenance worker. A third. The warehouse overlooking the tracks. A fourth. I stared. What links them? Holmes smiled faintly. I do not yet know. Then why mark them? Because they all lie within the same quarter-mile radius. The room fell silent. Inspector Finch leaned closer. His eyes widened. You think that's significant? I never ignore geography. Holmes tapped the map. People may lie. Records may lie. Witnesses may lie. He looked toward us. But locations seldom do. At that exact moment, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Mrs. Hudson entered carrying a telegram. Holmes opened it. As he read, his expression hardened. What is it? I asked. He handed me the paper. The message contained only a single sentence. George Henshaw was found dead 1 hour ago. The railway maintenance worker. The man who had serviced the carriage. The man Holmes had requested information about only that morning. Inspector Finch rose abruptly. My God! Holmes folded the telegram carefully. The firelight reflected in his cold grey eyes. The game, he said quietly, has become considerably more dangerous. And for the first time since the investigation began, we were no longer pursuing a single murder. We were pursuing 2. Chapter 4. Death Beneath the Signal Tower. The telegram had scarcely left my hand before Holmes was already reaching for his coat. Watson, your revolver. My revolver? Yes. Do you anticipate trouble? Holmes buttoned his coat. My dear fellow, we have just learned that a potential witness has died mere hours after attracting our attention. Inspector Finch nodded grimly. I fear Holmes may be correct. Within 10 minutes we were seated in a cab, racing through the evening fog toward the northern rail yards. London's streets appeared ghostly beneath the gas lamps. Figures emerged from the mist only to vanish moments later. Horses snorted clouds of steam into the cold air. Holmes remained silent throughout the journey. His eyes were closed. To an observer, he might have appeared asleep. I knew better. His mind was working furiously. At last he spoke. 2 murders. Inspector Finch glanced toward him. You believe Henshaw was murdered? Without question. We have not yet seen the body. We do not need to. Finch frowned. You sound very certain. Holmes opened his eyes. Tell me, Inspector. How many railway maintenance workers die suddenly on the same day they become relevant to a murder investigation? The inspector had no answer. 20 minutes later, we arrived at the scene. A cluster of policemen stood near an abandoned signal tower overlooking several converging railway lines. Lanterns illuminated the area. Their yellow glow revealed a grim sight. A body lay upon the frozen ground. Several officers stepped aside as we approached. George Henshaw was younger than I had expected, perhaps 35, broad-shouldered, strong, a labourer accustomed to physical work. His face, however, was frozen in an expression of terrible surprise. I knelt beside him. What do you observe, Watson? Holmes asked. I conducted a brief examination. No obvious wounds. Continue. No gunshot injury. Yes. No knife wound. Good. I looked more carefully. Then something caught my attention. A bruise. Where? Along the neck. Holmes nodded. I inspected the mark. It appears recent. Indeed. I rose. Strangulation? Holmes smiled slightly. You improve, Watson. Inspector Finch crouched beside us. Can you determine anything else? I examined the body again. This time I noticed dirt beneath the victim's fingernails. Quite a great deal of it. He struggled. Excellent. Against his attacker. Precisely. Holmes stood. Yet there is something more important. He pointed toward the victim's boots. At first I saw nothing unusual. Then realization struck. Mud. Yes. The ground here is dry. Holmes nodded approvingly. The observation was undeniable. Despite recent rain, the soil surrounding the signal tower had hardened, yet thick mud clung to Henshaw's boots. Mud from somewhere else. He was moved, I said. Exactly. Inspector Finch swore softly. Murdered elsewhere, then transported here. Holmes began examining the surrounding area. The signal tower itself had long been abandoned. Broken windows stared down upon us like empty eyes. Rust covered the metal staircase. No trains had used the structure for years. An odd place to leave a body, I remarked. No, Holmes pointed upward. A perfect place. Why? Visibility. We climbed the staircase. From the tower platform, the answer became obvious. The entire rail network stretched before us. Dozens of tracks, maintenance yards, warehouses, switching stations. Every important railway movement could be observed from this position. Holmes gazed across the landscape. His expression became thoughtful. Interesting. What is? Asked Finch. Holmes pointed toward a distant building. A warehouse. The same warehouse we had noticed from the railway carriage. The one with the elevated viewing platform. The inspector frowned. You think there's a connection? I think there is always a connection. We descended once more. One of the constables approached. Sir, Inspector Finch turned. What is it? We found this in the victim's pocket. The constable handed over a folded paper. Finch opened it. His face changed immediately. What does it say? I asked. The inspector passed it to Holmes. The message was written in hurried pencil. He saw the box. Nothing else. No signature. No explanation. Holmes read it twice, then carefully folded it away. The box, he murmured. The missing luggage? I asked. Possibly. Inspector Finch looked puzzled. You think Henshaw saw it? Holmes nodded. Or handled it. The inspector rubbed his forehead. This grows more confusing by the hour. It grows clearer. Finch stared. Clearer? Certainly. Holmes gestured toward the body. Mr. Henshaw serviced the carriage. Yes. He likely discovered something. Yes. He then died. The inspector nodded. Agreed. Holmes smiled faintly. Therefore, he discovered something worth killing for. We continued our investigation. Nearly an hour passed before Holmes found the clue that transformed everything. It occurred near the base of the tower. Among weeds and discarded debris lay a small metallic object. Holmes stooped to retrieve it. The moment he examined it, his eyes narrowed. "What is it?" I asked. He handed it over. The object appeared to be a brass token. One side bore a number, the other displayed a symbol, a triangle, the same triangle we had seen traced upon the carriage window. A chill passed through me. Inspector Finch stared. The same mark. Exactly. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Holmes did something unexpected. He laughed. Not loudly. Not cheerfully. Rather the laugh of a man whose suspicions had just been confirmed. "You know the symbol?" I asked. "Not exactly. But you've seen it before." "Yes." The inspector stepped closer. "Where?" Holmes hesitated. For perhaps the first time since I had known him, he seemed reluctant to answer. At last he spoke. 7 years ago." The inspector waited. "So?" Holmes looked toward the fog-covered tracks. "A government investigation. Into what?" "A series of disappearances." I stared. "You never mentioned this." "No." "What happened?" Holmes' expression darkened. "The case vanished." "Vanished? There is no better word." Inspector Finch frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means witnesses disappeared. Records disappeared. Evidence disappeared." Holmes folded his arms. "And eventually the investigation itself disappeared." A silence followed. Even the wind seemed to pause. "The triangle was involved?" I asked. "Yes." "And you never solved it?" Holmes turned toward me. The answer arrived quietly. "No." I cannot adequately describe my astonishment. Sherlock Holmes rarely failed. The notion that an unsolved mystery existed within his past seemed almost impossible. Yet the seriousness in his eyes left no room for doubt. Before I could ask another question, a shout arose from below. One of the constables was waving urgently. "Inspector!" We hurried down. The officer pointed toward a section of earth near the tower. Freshly disturbed soil. A shallow excavation. Someone had recently buried something there, or removed something. The constable handed Finch a spade. Within minutes, several men were digging. The pit proved surprisingly deep, 5 feet, 6. Then the blade struck wood, a crate. The officers pulled it free. My heart quickened. "A box," I said. Holmes nodded. The crate was rectangular, roughly the same dimensions as the dust outline discovered in the carriage. For several moments nobody moved. Then Finch forced open the lid. Inside rested stacks of documents. Ledgers, letters, contracts, hundreds of papers carefully bundled together. Holmes examined the first page. His expression immediately changed. "What is it?" I asked. He handed me the document. At the top appeared a name, Edwin Mercer. I turned several pages. The documents appeared financial in nature. Records of payments, investments, property transfers. Nothing immediately sinister, yet Holmes looked deeply troubled. "These are not ordinary business records." "How can you tell?" He pointed toward a column of names. I followed his finger. Then my blood ran cold. Several entries had been crossed out. Beside each crossed-out name appeared a date, and every individual listed was dead. Inspector Finch stared. "My God." Holmes closed the ledger. "The box," he said quietly, "was never about money." "Then what?" He looked toward the dark railway lines stretching into the fog. "It was a list." "A list of what?" His answer came in a whisper. "A list of victims." And suddenly the murder of Edwin Mercer seemed far less important than whatever secret had been hidden inside that box. Chapter 5. The Ledger of the Dead. The crate was transported under police guard to Scotland Yard that same evening. By midnight, Holmes, Inspector Finch and I occupied a private evidence room illuminated by 2 oil lamps and a smouldering coal stove. The recovered documents covered nearly every available surface. Ledgers lay open across tables. Bundles of correspondence had been carefully arranged into stacks. Sheets of financial records formed small mountains around Holmes's chair. For 3 hours he worked without pause. Not once did he complain of fatigue. Indeed, Holmes appeared energized. Nothing stimulated him more than the sudden appearance of order within apparent chaos. At approximately 1 o'clock in the morning, Inspector Finch finally broke the silence. "Have you found anything?" Holmes did not look up. "Several things." The inspector brightened. "Such as?" "Most of these records are genuine." "Most. Not all." Finch frowned. "How can you tell?" Holmes held up a document. "The ink." I peered closer. The page appeared ordinary enough. Holmes tapped one section. "This signature claims to be 15 years old." "Yes, it is not." "Why?" "The chemical composition of the ink." The inspector sighed. "Of course." Holmes continued reading. "The forgery is excellent, but still a forgery." "What does it mean?" I asked. "It means someone altered history." The answer was simple. The implications were not. Holmes selected several papers and placed them into a separate pile. These documents were modified. Recently, within the last 2 years. Inspector Finch looked troubled. "You believe Mercer discovered this?" "Undoubtedly." "And that led to his death?" "Possibly." Holmes leaned back. "But there is something far more interesting." He opened one of the ledgers. Rows of names filled the page. Beside each name appeared dates, locations, and coded notations. Most had been crossed out. Some had not. I examined the entries. The names belonged to businessmen, lawyers, landowners, railway investors, and government officials. At first glance, they seemed unrelated. Yet Holmes had already noticed a pattern. "Observe the years." I did. The earliest entry dated back 23 years. The most recent only 3 months. A remarkably long span of time. "What does it suggest?" I asked. Holmes folded his arms. "Continuity." Inspector Finch looked puzzled. "In plain English, this was not the work of one criminal." "Why not?" "Because one criminal would eventually die." The inspector nodded. "True, yet the records continue uninterrupted across 2 decades. Holmes tapped the ledger. "This organization survives individual members." A cold silence followed. The word itself carried weight. Organization. Not murderer. Not suspect. Organization. I found myself recalling the triangular symbol. The buried crate. The vanished investigation Holmes had mentioned. A troubling picture was beginning to emerge. At length, Finch asked the obvious question. "What sort of organization?" Holmes smiled thinly. "If I knew that, Inspector, our work would be nearly complete." The inspector groaned. Shortly afterward, Holmes discovered something else. A letter. Unlike the other documents, it bore no signature, no official heading, no address. Merely a short, handwritten message. Holmes read it silently. Then again. Then a third time. Finally, he handed it to me. The contents were brief. The 4th account remains unresolved. Mercer suspects the truth. If necessary, move the final carriage. Nothing more. I read it twice. The final carriage? Interesting wording, Holmes murmured. Inspector Finch leaned forward. Perhaps it refers to the train. No. Why not? The letter predates the murder by 8 months. Finch blinked. 8 months? Precisely. The room grew quiet. The implications were immediate. The phrase could not refer to the specific journey during which Mercer died. Something else had been called the final carriage. Something significant enough to be mentioned months beforehand. I watched Holmes carefully. His eyes had acquired that distant expression which often preceded a breakthrough. "What are you thinking?" He remained silent. Then suddenly he rose. "Watson." "Yes?" "Do you remember the warehouse? The one overlooking the railway?" "Exactly. Of course. And the signal tower?" "Yes." Holmes nodded. "They are connected." Inspector Finch frowned. "How?" "I am not yet certain." The answer was frustratingly familiar. Yet I had learned long ago that Holmes rarely revealed theories until he possessed proof. At that moment, a clerk entered the room. He carried a small parcel. For Mr. Holmes. Holmes accepted it. No sender? None. The clerk departed. The parcel itself was unremarkable. Brown paper, string, no markings, yet Holmes approached it cautiously. "A bomb?" asked Finch. "No. You sound certain. The sender wishes to communicate." He carefully untied the string. Inside lay a single object, a pocket watch, silver, almost identical to the one found upon Edwin Mercer's body. The inspector stared. "Good Lord!" Holmes opened the casing. A folded paper rested inside. The same method, the same concealment, the same deliberate symbolism. Holmes unfolded the message. For the first time that evening, genuine surprise crossed his face. "What is it?" I asked. He handed me the note. I read the words aloud. "You are looking in the wrong direction." A strange message, yet something immediately bothered me. That seems almost helpful. Holmes smiled faintly. Appearances deceive. Inspector Finch examined the watch. Then his eyes widened. "There is another paper." Indeed there was. A second note hidden beneath the first. Holmes unfolded it. The room became silent. The message contained only 3 words. "Ask Arthur Bellamy, the railway superintendent, the man who had first granted us access to the carriage." Inspector Finch looked astonished. "Bellamy?" Holmes remained thoughtful. "Curious. You suspect him?" "Not necessarily." "Then what?" Holmes placed both notes upon the table. "The sender wants us to suspect him." The distinction was important. "Why?" I asked. "Because Bellamy knows something. About Mercer? Perhaps. About the organization? More likely." The inspector stood. "I'll bring him in immediately." Holmes raised a hand. "No." Finch stopped. "No? Observe the timing." "The timing?" "The message arrived tonight." "Yes." "The sender expects us to question Bellamy." Inspector Finch slowly understood. "A trap?" "Possibly." Holmes moved toward the window. The fog outside had thickened. London appeared transformed into a city of shadows. "If Bellamy is innocent," Holmes continued, "then someone may attempt to silence him before morning." The inspector's expression hardened. "I'll place officers around his residence." "Excellent." Finch hurried away. For several minutes Holmes remained by the window. At last I joined him. "You've become concerned." "A reasonable observation." "Why?" He hesitated, then spoke quietly. "Because this opponent is intelligent. Many criminals are. Not like this." Holmes folded his arms. "They anticipate our actions. They guide our investigation. They eliminate witnesses." His eyes remained fixed upon the darkness beyond Baker Street. "And they have now begun communicating directly." I recalled the threatening note received by Graves. The hidden messages inside watches, the strange triangle, the buried crate. An uncomfortable realization settled upon me. Someone was not merely reacting to Holmes. Someone was playing against him. A knock interrupted my thoughts. Mrs. Hudson entered. Another telegram. Holmes accepted it. He read the message, then immediately handed it to me. My stomach tightened. The telegram had been sent from a police officer guarding Arthur Bellamy's residence. The message was brief. Bellamy left his house 2 hours ago. He never arrived home. Holmes slowly folded the telegram. His expression became very still. That stillness, I had learned, often preceded action. "Watson." "Yes?" "Inform Inspector Finch. At once. And tell him something else." "What?" Holmes looked toward the fire. The shadows danced across his sharp features. "We are no longer trying to prevent a murder." "What do you mean?" His answer chilled me. "I believe we are already too late." For Arthur Bellamy, the night had only just begun. But somewhere in the fog-covered streets of London, another piece had moved across the board, and Sherlock Holmes had finally met the adversary who seemed determined to stay one step ahead. Chapter 6. The Superintendent Vanishes. The telegram concerning Arthur Bellamy's disappearance reached Inspector Finch shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning. Within half an hour, we were once again traversing London's sleeping streets. The city possessed a peculiar character at such hours. The respectable crowds had vanished, shop windows stood dark, the endless noise of daytime commerce had faded. Only policemen, labourers, night watchmen, and less reputable figures moved through the fog-shrouded thoroughfares. It was in such conditions that crimes flourished, and it was under such conditions that Arthur Bellamy had disappeared. His residence stood in Camden, a respectable brick house occupied by Bellamy, his wife, and their teenage daughter. The household was in a state of alarm when we arrived. Mrs. Bellamy greeted us at the door. She appeared exhausted and frightened. Inspector Finch introduced us. "Mrs. Bellamy, when did you last see your husband?" "About 7 o'clock. What happened?" "He received a letter." Holmes immediately looked interested. "A letter?" "Yes." "Did he read it here?" She nodded. "And afterward?" "He seemed troubled." "In what way?" "He became pale." She hesitated. I asked if something was wrong. "What did he say?" Mrs. Bellamy swallowed. "He said only one sentence." "What sentence?" "I hoped they had forgotten me." The room grew silent. Holmes exchanged a glance with me. A telling remark. Not "I don't know who sent this." Not "this must be a mistake." Instead, "I hoped they had forgotten me." As though Bellamy already knew precisely who was contacting him. "Did he leave immediately?" Holmes asked. "Within 10 minutes. Alone?" "Yes." "Did he take anything with him?" Mrs. Bellamy thought for a moment. "Only a small leather case. Documents, perhaps?" "I believe so." Holmes nodded thoughtfully. "Do you still possess the letter?" Her face fell. "No." "Why not?" "He burned it." That answer deepened the mystery considerably. Bellamy had not merely received a message, he had destroyed the evidence. The act suggested fear, or loyalty, possibly both. Holmes spent several minutes examining Bellamy's study. The room contained shelves of railway records, correspondence, maps, and technical manuals. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then Holmes paused beside a wastebasket. He retrieved a tiny fragment of paper. Most of it had been burned. Only a few words remained visible. I leaned closer. The surviving text read, "The final carriage," and beneath it, "Midnight." Nothing more. Yet Holmes smiled. "You expected to find something?" I asked. "No." "Then why smile?" "Because someone made a mistake." Inspector Finch looked puzzled. "A mistake?" "Certainly." Holmes held up the fragment. "The writer assumed Bellamy would destroy the entire letter, and he nearly did." "Nearly." Holmes slipped the fragment into his pocket. Criminal enterprises often fail because of nearly. By dawn we had learned little more. Bellamy had vanished completely. No witnesses had observed his departure. No cabman remembered transporting him. No body had been discovered. No ransom demand appeared. It was as though the railway superintendent had stepped into the fog and dissolved. Holmes found this deeply significant. "Most disappearances are not mysterious," he remarked as we returned to Baker Street. "They are not?" "Certainly not." "What are they then?" "Poorly examined." I laughed. "You make everything sound simple. It usually is." "Then explain Bellamy." Holmes stared through the carriage window. "Bellamy is different." "Why?" "Because he intended to disappear." The statement surprised me. "You believe he left voluntarily?" "At first. And afterward." Holmes's expression darkened. "Afterward, I fear events may have exceeded his intentions." That afternoon brought an unexpected breakthrough. One of Holmes's network of informants arrived bearing information concerning Edwin Mercer. The man, a sharp-eyed clerk named Wilkes, had spent years collecting financial intelligence throughout the city. His memory bordered upon the extraordinary. Holmes listened carefully as he delivered his report. Mercer wasn't merely an investor. No, he specialized in recovering hidden assets. Holmes immediately became attentive. "Go on." When businesses collapsed, Mercer traced missing funds. Legal investigations? Mostly. The clerk hesitated, though some of his clients preferred discretion. Interesting. Very interesting. Did Mercer have enemies? Holmes asked. Wilkes laughed. Hundreds. Any particular enemies? Several powerful ones. The clerk produced a notebook. Among the names listed were bankers, industrialists, shipping magnates, and politicians. I examined the list. One entry caught my attention. Lord Ashcombe. Holmes glanced at it. Who is he? Wilkes raised an eyebrow. You don't know? I know many things. Not this. The clerk lowered his voice. Lord Ashcombe controls substantial railway interests. The room fell silent. Railways again. Every road seemed to lead back toward them. Tell me about him, Holmes said. Wilkes considered his words carefully. Respected, influential, extremely wealthy, and, the clerk hesitated, feared. Holmes smiled faintly. Now we approach the interesting portion. Most men avoid crossing him. Why? No one seems entirely certain. The answer itself was revealing. Reputation often grew from truth. After Wilkes departed, Holmes spread a map across the table. Several locations had already been marked. The railway carriage, the signal tower, the warehouse, Bellamy's residence, various properties linked to Mercer. Now Holmes added another point. Ashcombe House, a sprawling estate located on the western edge of London. I studied the arrangement. Something immediately struck me. Good heavens! Holmes looked up. You see it? Yes. The locations formed a rough triangle. Not perfect, but unmistakable. The same triangular shape that had appeared upon the carriage window. The same symbol found on the brass token. The same mark connected to Holmes's forgotten investigation. For several moments neither of us spoke. Then Holmes slowly nodded. At last. At last what? The symbol is not merely an emblem. It isn't? No. He tapped the map. It is a map. A chill passed through me. A map of what? The organization. I stared. You mean these locations are connected? Undoubtedly. How? Holmes pointed. Each represents a point of operation. The carriage, the warehouse, the signal tower. He continued tracing lines. Together they create a network hidden within plain sight. The possibility was astonishing and deeply troubling. That evening, Holmes did something unusual. He disguised himself. Not merely a change of clothing, a complete transformation. Within 20 minutes, Sherlock Holmes had become an aging dock worker with stooped shoulders, stained hands, and a slight limp. Even his voice changed. I had witnessed many disguises throughout our friendship. This one ranked among his finest. You are going out? I asked. Naturally. Where? The warehouse. Alone? Certainly. That seems unwise. Holmes smiled. Most useful activities are. Before departing, however, he left me with a peculiar instruction. If I have not returned by midnight, notify Inspector Finch. The seriousness in his tone troubled me. You expect danger? I expect answers, which are often the same thing. He laughed softly. Precisely. Then he disappeared into the London fog. Midnight arrived. Holmes did not return. midnight. Still nothing. 1 o'clock. No sign. Concern began replacing patience. At 1:15, a sharp knock sounded upon the door. I opened it immediately. A messenger stood outside. He handed me an envelope. No reply needed. Then he vanished into the darkness. My pulse quickened. The envelope bore no name, no address, nothing. I opened it. Inside lay a single sheet of paper. Upon it appeared only 6 handwritten words. Holmes has found the final carriage. Below the sentence was the familiar triangular symbol. Nothing else. No explanation. No signature. No indication whether the message represented a warning or a death sentence. And for the first time since the investigation began, I genuinely feared for Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 7. The Warehouse at Blackwater Lane. There are few moments in a man's life when fear arrives with such sudden force that all rational thought momentarily deserts him. The note concerning Holmes produced precisely such an effect. For perhaps 30 seconds, I simply stood beside the sitting-room lamp, staring at the message. The words seemed unreal. Holmes has found the final carriage. Nothing more. Yet I knew enough of the case to understand the danger hidden within that simple sentence. If Holmes had indeed discovered the truth behind the mysterious phrase, then he had likely become the most dangerous man in London. And dangerous men rarely survived long. I wasted no time. Within 15 minutes, Inspector Finch stood inside Baker Street, examining the note. His expression grew increasingly grave. "You believe it's genuine?" I asked. "Undoubtedly. Why?" He pointed toward the paper. "The handwriting. What about it?" "The same hand that threatened Lionel Graves." That settled the matter. The message came from the organization, the very people we were pursuing. "What do we do?" I asked. Finch folded the note. "We find Holmes." An hour later, we stood outside the warehouse at Blackwater Lane. The building appeared exactly as I remembered. Dark, silent, massive. Its upper viewing platform overlooked the railway network like the bridge of a ship. Fog drifted between nearby buildings. The atmosphere possessed an almost theatrical quality. One could easily imagine conspirators conducting secret meetings within its shadows. The police had already surrounded the structure. Several officers waited near the entrances. Yet something felt wrong. Too quiet. Far too quiet. Inspector Finch seemed to sense it as well. "Nobody enters alone," he said. I nodded. The doors were forced open. Lanterns illuminated the darkness within. Dust floated through the beams of light. Rows of crates lined the walls. Old machinery occupied corners. Nothing moved, nothing stirred. The warehouse appeared abandoned, yet Holmes had clearly come here. The question was whether he had left. We searched methodically. Ground floor first, then the offices, then the upper platform. At length one of the constables called out, "Inspector!" We hurried toward him. The man pointed downward. Footprints, several sets, clearly visible within a layer of dust. Holmes's trail could be identified easily. His disguise may have fooled human observers. It had not fooled the floor. The prints led toward a staircase, descending beneath the warehouse. "A cellar," said Finch. The discovery instantly heightened everyone's attention. Lanterns were raised, revolvers drawn. The staircase creaked beneath our feet. At the bottom, we discovered a hidden chamber, and there, for the first time, the true scope of the conspiracy became visible. The room was enormous, much larger than the warehouse above suggested. Long tables filled the center. Maps covered the walls. Cabinets contained hundreds of files, ledgers, photographs, correspondence, records, thousands upon thousands of records. I stared in disbelief. My God! Inspector Finch looked equally astonished. "What is this place?" The answer came from behind us. An archive. Every man in the room turned. Sherlock Holmes emerged from a side passage. Alive, unharmed, entirely calm. I confess, I nearly shook his hand in relief. Instead, I settled for a glare. "Holmes! My dear Watson, you might have informed us you were not dead. That possibility never occurred to me." Inspector Finch sighed heavily. "You have a remarkable talent for shortening my lifespan." Holmes smiled faintly. "An unfortunate side effect of investigation." Once the excitement subsided, Holmes guided us deeper into the underground chamber. The archive proved astonishing. Entire walls were dedicated to surveillance records. Names, addresses, financial histories, political affiliations, personal scandals, private correspondence, every conceivable detail about hundreds of influential individuals. The sheer scale of it was staggering. "Who collected this?" Finch asked. "The organization. For what purpose?" Holmes paused. "Control. The answer seemed almost too simple, yet the evidence supported it. Blackmail, manipulation, influence, power. The archive represented information converted into a weapon. Mercer discovered this? I asked. Part of it. Holmes nodded. And once he understood its significance, he became a liability. The inspector examined one of the cabinets. How old are these records? 20 years at least. Perhaps longer. A troubling realization dawned upon me. This organization has operated for decades. Yes. And nobody stopped them. Holmes looked toward the rows of files. Many attempted to. His tone suggested the outcome. We spent nearly an hour examining the archive. Then Holmes led us into a smaller chamber, a private office. Unlike the rest of the warehouse, this room showed signs of recent use. The fireplace contained fresh ashes. The desk had been occupied recently. Several glasses stood upon a side table. Someone had left in a hurry, or expected to return. On the wall hung a large railway map. Coloured lines connected stations across England. Certain routes had been marked in red. One route immediately caught my eye. York to London, the route travelled by Edwin Mercer. Inspector Finch noticed it as well. The murder route. Exactly, said Holmes. He approached the desk. There he produced a folder. Unlike the others, it bore a title. 3 simple words. The Final Carriage. My pulse quickened. At last. The phrase that had haunted the investigation from the beginning. Holmes opened the file. Inside rested dozens of documents. Financial reports, letters, meeting records, operational notes. The inspector scanned the pages. Then his expression changed. Good Lord. What is it? I asked. He handed me a document. Within moments I understood. The Final Carriage was not a train. It was a code name, a project, a secret operation, one that had existed for over 20 years. According to the records, influential figures had used railway infrastructure to move information, money, and sensitive documents throughout the country. The Final Carriage of selected trains served as a secure transport channel. Hidden compartments, false manifests, anonymous couriers, an entire clandestine network concealed within ordinary rail traffic. The brilliance of it was undeniable. No one questioned trains. No one noticed the Final Carriage, until Mercer, and then Holmes. As we studied the documents, a voice suddenly echoed from the corridor beyond. Remarkable. Every man froze. The voice was calm, educated, confident. Holmes turned slowly. I wondered how long it would take. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, elegant, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, perhaps 60 years old. His expression revealed neither fear nor surprise, only amusement. Inspector Finch immediately recognized him. His face paled. Lord Ashcombe. The aristocrat inclined his head slightly. Inspector. Holmes remained perfectly still. So. Ashcombe smiled. So. Neither man moved. The atmosphere grew electric. I felt as though I were witnessing the opening move of a duel. "Oh, have we met before?" asked Holmes. The aristocrat laughed softly. "Not formally, but you know me." "Very well." Holmes nodded. "The triangle." "Indeed." "The vanished investigation." "Also correct." The aristocrat appeared genuinely impressed. "You continue to exceed expectations." Inspector Finch stepped forward. "In the name of the law." Ashcombe raised a hand. "Please." Something in his tone caused even Finch to pause. The nobleman looked toward Holmes. "You've been searching for answers." "Naturally. And now you believe you've found them." "I rarely believe. I prefer evidence." Ashcombe smiled. "A wise habit." For several seconds the two men regarded one another. Then Lord Ashcombe spoke the words that changed the case forever. Edwin Mercer was not the first victim. Holmes said nothing. He was not even the second. The aristocrat folded his hands. "The organization you seek has already claimed 23 lives." Silence filled the chamber. 23. The number struck with physical force. Even Holmes seemed momentarily surprised. Ashcombe continued, "And unless you understand what truly happened 23 years ago," his gaze shifted toward the file, "you will never solve the final murder." A chill ran through me. Not the final carriage, the final murder. The distinction was deliberate, and before anyone could question him further, a gunshot exploded somewhere above us. Then another. Then shouting. Chaos erupted throughout the warehouse. And Lord Ashcombe smiled, because whatever was happening upstairs, he had expected it. Chapter 8. 23 years earlier. The gunshots above shattered the tense stillness of the underground office. For a fraction of a second, nobody moved. Then Inspector Finch reacted first. "Officers!" He rushed toward the corridor. Several constables followed immediately. More shouting echoed from the warehouse overhead. Boots thundered across wooden floors. A window shattered somewhere above us. The entire building seemed suddenly alive. Yet amid the confusion, one detail struck me as extraordinary. Lord Ashcombe remained perfectly calm. Indeed, the aristocrat appeared almost amused, as though events were proceeding exactly according to a schedule known only to himself. Holmes observed this as well. "You expected trouble," Ashcombe smiled. "I expected inevitability." The answer irritated Holmes. "I dislike riddles." "No," the nobleman chuckled softly. "You dislike riddles you have not yet solved." For several seconds the two men regarded one another. Then Holmes stepped closer. "Who is attacking the warehouse?" "No one." A curious answer. "The gunfire is real." "Certainly." "Then who is responsible?" Ashcombe's eyes glittered. "The same people who killed Mercer." The room fell silent. "Your own organization?" I asked. "Formally." The single word carried immense significance. Formally. Not presently, formally. Something had changed. A division, perhaps. A betrayal. A conflict hidden beneath the surface of the conspiracy. Holmes immediately recognized its importance. "The organization has fractured." Ashcombe inclined his head. "Excellent. You and Mercer were on the same side. Eventually, against someone else." The aristocrat smiled. "Now we are making progress." The sounds of disturbance above gradually diminished. Inspector Finch returned several minutes later. His expression was grim. 3 suspects escaped. "Any arrests?" "2. Names?" "None yet." Holmes nodded. His attention remained fixed upon Ashcombe. The aristocrat, remarkably, had made no attempt to flee. Indeed, he seemed eager to talk. A fact Holmes found deeply suspicious. "Why remain?" Holmes asked suddenly. Ashcombe raised an eyebrow. "Remain? You had ample opportunity to escape." The nobleman laughed. "My dear Mr. Holmes, if I wished to disappear, you would never find me." The confidence sounded neither arrogant nor boastful. Merely factual, and somehow that made it more unsettling. Then why stay? For the first time, Ashcombe's expression lost some of its amusement. "Because too many people are already dead." The answer surprised everyone, including Holmes. Several minutes later, we gathered around the office table. Ashcombe requested a glass of water. Holmes allowed it. The aristocrat drank slowly, then placed the glass aside. 23 years ago," he began, "there were 4 of us." The room grew silent. "The founders?" Holmes asked. Ashcombe nodded. 4 men. He began counting upon his fingers. A railway executive, a banker, a government advisor, and myself. The aristocrat's voice remained steady. "We were ambitious." "Greedy?" asked Holmes. Ashcombe smiled faintly. "Often the same thing." I could not disagree. "What did you create?" Holmes asked. "A network. The final carriage?" "Eventually," Ashcombe leaned back. "Originally, it was merely information." His gaze drifted toward the archives. "We collected secrets." "Why?" "Influence." Again that word. Influence. The true currency of powerful men. "Blackmail," said Finch. Ashcombe shrugged. "Occasionally." Extortion. Sometimes. Corruption. The aristocrat smiled. Frequently. At least he possessed honesty. Or perhaps he no longer cared. As the story unfolded, the origins of the conspiracy gradually emerged. The four founders had discovered something remarkable. Information could be more valuable than money. A hidden scandal, a private debt, an illicit affair, a forged contract. Such secrets granted leverage over men who otherwise appeared untouchable. Over time, the organization expanded. Its methods became increasingly sophisticated. Railways provided transportation, warehouses provided storage. The final carriage became the secure channel through which sensitive information traveled across Britain. For years the system flourished. Then everything changed. "What happened?" Holmes asked. Ashcombe became silent. For several moments he stared at the floor. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. "The fifth man." The phrase immediately attracted Holmes' attention. There were four founders, originally. Then who was the fifth? Ashcombe looked toward the fire. "A mistake." The answer hung heavily in the air. "A recruit?" I asked. "Yes." "What was his name?" The aristocrat hesitated, then answered. "Jonathan Mercer." A chill passed through me. Mercer, the same surname as the murdered financier. Holmes immediately noticed. Edwin Mercer's father. Correct. The room became utterly silent. At last the generations connected. "What happened to him?" Holmes asked. Ashcombe's expression hardened. "He discovered what we were becoming." "And?" he objected. "Morally?" Ashcombe laughed bitterly. "Imagine such a thing." Holmes remained serious. "Continue." "He threatened to expose everything." The answer seemed inevitable. "And then?" The aristocrat looked away. "He died." No one spoke. The simplicity of the statement made it all the more disturbing. "Accident?" Holmes asked. "No." "Murder?" A long silence followed. Finally, Ashcombe nodded. "Yes." The confession landed like a hammer blow. Inspector Finch stared. "You killed him." The aristocrat's face tightened. "We all did." The room remained silent for several seconds. Holmes alone appeared unsurprised. "You buried the crime?" "Yes." "You concealed the evidence?" "Yes." "You continued operating?" Ashcombe nodded. "For 23 years." The aristocrat's voice now carried genuine weariness. A mistake that grew larger every year. Something in his tone struck me. Regret. Not complete remorse, but something close. "What happened afterward?" Holmes asked. "Jonathan's son disappeared." "Edwin?" "No." The answer startled us. "He had another son." A new revelation. Holmes leaned forward. "Another son? Older? What became of him?" Ashcombe's gaze darkened. "No one knows." The answer felt incomplete. Holmes sensed it immediately. "You are lying." Ashcombe sighed. "Partially." "What really happened?" For several moments the aristocrat said nothing. Then he spoke. "The boy witnessed something." A silence followed. "My God," I murmured. "He saw the murder." Ashcombe nodded. "Part of it." Inspector Finch stared. "What became of him?" The nobleman closed his eyes briefly. "He vanished." "How convenient." Ashcombe looked toward Holmes. "I did not order it." "Yet someone did." The aristocrat did not answer. His silence spoke loudly enough. The implications were staggering. 23 years earlier, a man had been murdered. His child had disappeared. A conspiracy had buried the truth. Now, decades later, Edwin Mercer had somehow uncovered the secret and paid for it with his life. Yet Holmes remained troubled. I knew the signs. Something still failed to fit. "What is wrong?" I asked. Holmes stood and began pacing. "The numbers." Ashcombe looked up. "The numbers?" "The ledger." "What about it?" Holmes stopped. "The crate contained 23 dead names." "Yes, exactly 23. The aristocrat's expression changed slightly. A subtle reaction. Yet Holmes noticed it instantly. Ah, Ashcombe sighed. You see it. I believe so. Inspector Finch looked frustrated. Would someone kindly explain? Holmes turned. The list does not record victims. No? No. Holmes pointed toward the files. It records witnesses. The realization struck the room with shocking force. Not victims, witnesses. Every crossed-out name represented someone who knew the truth. Someone eliminated over the years. One by one. 23 years. 23 witnesses. 23 deaths. Ashcombe lowered his head. Correct. A terrible silence followed. The scale of the conspiracy suddenly appeared far darker than we had imagined. This was not merely blackmail, not merely corruption. It was systematic murder, a campaign spanning decades, designed to erase every trace of a single crime. Holmes folded his arms. And Edwin Mercer? Ashcombe looked up. For the first time, genuine sadness appeared in his eyes. He became witness number 24. The words lingered in the room like a funeral bell. Then, before anyone could speak further, a constable burst through the office door. His face was pale. "Inspector, what is it?" The officer struggled to catch his breath. "We found Arthur Bellamy." Every person in the room froze. Bellamy, alive or dead? The answer arrived immediately. "He's alive, sir." Relief swept through me, but only briefly, because the constable had not finished. "He's alive." The young officer swallowed. "And he says he knows who killed Edwin Mercer." The room fell silent. Even Holmes stopped pacing, at last. After murders, disappearances, secret organizations, hidden archives, and decades-old conspiracies, a living witness had finally named the killer. And yet, judging from the look upon Holmes's face, he feared the answer far more than the question. Chapter 9. Witness number 24. There are occasions in every investigation when scattered fragments suddenly begin drawing together. The investigator senses it before he can prove it. Loose threads begin converging. Contradictions reveal hidden patterns. Facts that once appeared unrelated slowly form a single coherent picture. As we departed the warehouse shortly before dawn, I could tell Holmes had entered precisely such a phase. His expression possessed an unusual intensity. The pieces were aligning, yet some final element remained missing, and until that missing element appeared, the entire structure remained incomplete. Arthur Bellamy, meanwhile, had been transported under heavy police protection to a secure location near Scotland Yard. By the time we arrived, the exhausted railway superintendent had received medical attention and several hours of rest. He appeared shaken but unharmed. The moment Holmes entered the room, Bellamy rose from his chair. "You found the warehouse?" "We did." The superintendent nodded slowly. "Then perhaps this can finally end." Holmes sat opposite him. "That depends entirely upon what you tell us." Bellamy swallowed. His hands trembled slightly. For a man who had vanished for 2 days, he seemed less frightened than burdened, like someone carrying a weight he had concealed for many years. "Start at the beginning," Holmes said. The superintendent stared at the floor. Then he began. "I joined the railway administration 21 years ago." Holmes nodded. "Shortly after Jonathan Mercer's death." Bellamy looked surprised. "You already know about that?" "We know enough." The superintendent gave a weary sigh. "Then you know the official story was false." "We suspect as much." Bellamy leaned forward. "I discovered that by accident." His voice remained low. "Years ago, I noticed irregular maintenance schedules." "On which route?" "The York-London line." "Interesting. The same line." "Always the same line." "What sort of irregularities?" Holmes asked. "Carriages appearing where they should not. False records. Missing cargo manifests." The superintendent paused. I began asking questions. "And?" No one answered. "Naturally." Bellamy nodded. "But eventually someone warned me." The room became quiet. "Who?" "I never learned his name." "What did he say?" The superintendent's face tightened. He told me there was one carriage I should never inspect. Holmes folded his arms. The final carriage. Yes. The answer arrived instantly. Bellamy continued. I ignored the warning. Of course you did. A faint smile appeared. Curiosity is a dangerous habit. Holmes nodded. I've noticed. The superintendent described how he had secretly inspected one of the organization's hidden railway compartments years earlier. What he found there had altered his life. Documents, ledgers, financial records, evidence of blackmail, evidence of corruption, evidence of murder, and among those papers, one item stood apart from all others, a photograph. Bellamy looked toward Holmes. I believe that photograph is the key. Holmes immediately became attentive. A photograph of whom? The superintendent hesitated, then answered, a child. The room fell silent. The missing witness? I asked. Bellamy nodded. The older Mercer boy. A chill passed through me. 23 years, an entire lifetime, yet the mystery still returned to that vanished child. What happened to him? Holmes asked. Bellamy's expression darkened. I don't know. You must know something. I know only what I saw. And what was that? Bellamy closed his eyes briefly. When I found the photograph, someone was standing behind me. The room remained utterly still. Who? Holmes asked quietly. The superintendent opened his eyes. Edwin Mercer, his younger brother. The connection suddenly became clear. Edwin had been investigating the conspiracy for years, perhaps decades, long before his murder. What did he tell you? Holmes asked. Bellamy looked toward the window. He told me his brother was alive. The words struck like lightning. Alive, not dead, not vanished. Alive. Inspector Finch stared. My God. Holmes, however, remained perfectly calm, almost too calm, as though the revelation confirmed something he had already suspected. Continue. Bellamy nodded. Edwin believed his brother had survived. Based upon what evidence? A letter. What letter? The superintendent reached into his coat. From an inner pocket he produced a folded document. For several seconds nobody moved. Then Holmes accepted it. The paper appeared old, very old. The ink had faded. Several creases suggested it had been opened countless times. Holmes unfolded it carefully. His eyes scanned the contents. Then something remarkable occurred. For perhaps the first time in the entire investigation, Sherlock Holmes looked genuinely astonished. I immediately stepped forward. What is it? Holmes handed me the letter. I began reading. The message had been written 20 years earlier. It contained no signature, yet its contents were unmistakable. Edwin, do not search for me. What happened that night was not your fault. They believe I am dead. Let them continue believing it. One day the truth will surface. Until then, trust no one wearing the triangle. Your brother. I read the final line twice. Then a third time. My pulse quickened. There was something deeply familiar about the handwriting, something I could not immediately place. Inspector Finch noticed it as well. That writing. Holmes nodded. Yes. You recognize it. Indeed. A long silence followed. Then Holmes folded the letter. His expression had changed. The pieces were finally coming together. Watson, he said quietly. Yes? Do you recall Lord Ashcombe's statement? Which one? He said the missing child witnessed the murder. Correct. He then disappeared. Yes. Holmes nodded. And yet he survived. I stared. The implication arrived instantly. You know who he is. Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he crossed the room. For several moments he remained silent. Then he spoke. The handwriting appears elsewhere in this case. Bellamy frowned. Where? Holmes turned. The hidden notes. A chill passed through the room. The watches, the warnings, the anonymous messages, every communication that had guided our investigation. Inspector Finch looked stunned. You mean the same person? Yes, the missing child. Exactly. Bellamy stared. My God, the conclusion was unavoidable. For months, perhaps years, the vanished Mercer brother had been operating from the shadows, guiding events, sending warnings, protecting evidence, remaining invisible, all while hunting the truth. Yet Holmes still seemed troubled. I knew him well enough to recognize the signs. What is wrong? He hesitated, then answered quietly. One question remains. Which question? If the missing brother survived, Holmes looked toward the old letter. Why reveal himself now? The room fell silent. Because the answer was obvious. A man who had hidden for 23 years would not emerge without reason. Something had changed, something significant, something urgent. The answer arrived less than an hour later. A messenger delivered another note. This one bore no signature, no address, only the familiar triangular symbol. Inspector Finch opened it, then immediately passed it to Holmes. The message contained a single sentence. Come to Hawthorne Station before midnight. Nothing more. No explanation. No demand. No threat. Yet every person in the room understood its significance. Hawthorne Station, one of the oldest rail terminals in London, abandoned for years, a forgotten place, a hidden place, exactly the sort of location this conspiracy preferred. Bellamy's face had turned pale. He wants to meet you. Holmes nodded. Who? The brother. Perhaps. Inspector Finch frowned. Or a trap. Also possible. Will you go? Holmes smiled faintly. My dear Inspector, he folded the note carefully. A man who has spent 23 years avoiding death does not suddenly request a meeting without reason. Bellamy looked uneasy. You believe he finally intends to speak? I believe, said Holmes, that he finally intends to finish something. The superintendent stared. Finish what? Holmes's gaze drifted toward the fog-covered streets beyond the window. His answer came quietly. The original murder. A silence followed. 23 years. 24 witnesses. 2 recent murders. Countless lies. And now, at last, the surviving witness was stepping from the shadows. Yet, as I looked at Holmes, I realized something deeply unsettling. He no longer seemed focused upon Edwin Mercer's killer. Instead, he appeared focused upon preventing another death. Because somewhere ahead of us, hidden among the abandoned tracks and forgotten platforms of Hawthorne Station, someone had already decided how this story would end. Chapter 10. The Ghost of Hawthorne Station. The hours leading to midnight passed with agonizing slowness. For once, even Holmes appeared restless. He spent the evening reviewing documents recovered from the warehouse, studying the old Mercer letter, and comparing various samples of handwriting collected throughout the investigation. Not a word escaped him regarding his conclusions. By 10 o'clock, Inspector Finch had assembled a discreet team of officers. Their instructions were clear. No uniforms near Hawthorne Station. No visible police presence. No action unless Holmes signalled. The sender expects caution, Holmes explained. We shall not disappoint him. At 11:30 we departed. The fog had returned. Indeed, it seemed thicker than ever. The city faded gradually behind us as our carriage rattled toward the abandoned station on London's eastern edge. Few places possessed a more melancholy appearance. Hawthorne Station had once served thousands of passengers each week. Now nature slowly reclaimed it. Broken windows stared across empty platforms. Iron supports rusted beneath decades of neglect. Grass grew between tracks where locomotives no longer travelled. The station resembled a monument to forgotten journeys, a fitting location for secrets buried 23 years. We entered through a side gate. The platform beyond was deserted. No lights, no movement, no sound except the distant whistle of wind passing through broken structures. Inspector Finch signalled his men. They disappeared silently into the darkness. Holmes, meanwhile, advanced toward the central platform. His pace remained calm, measured, almost casual. I stayed close beside him. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then a voice emerged from the fog. "You arrived." The words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Holmes stopped. "So did you." A figure stepped slowly from the mist. At first I could discern little. Then the man entered a shaft of moonlight. He appeared approximately 40 years of age, tall, lean, dark-haired. His clothing was simple but well-maintained. Yet what struck me most was his face, not because I recognized it, but because I recognized something within it, a resemblance, subtle yet unmistakable. The eyes, the jawline, the expression. He resembled Edwin Mercer. Not exactly, but enough. The stranger noticed my reaction. "You see it," Holmes nodded. "Jonathan Mercer." The man smiled faintly. At last, the missing child, the vanished witness, the ghost who had haunted the entire investigation, standing before us in flesh and blood. For several moments nobody spoke. 23 years of mystery hung between them. At length Holmes broke the silence. "You have been guiding us." "Yes." "The messages?" "Mine." "The watches?" "Mine." "The warnings?" "Mine." Holmes folded his arms. "You could have revealed yourself sooner." Jonathan's expression darkened. "No. Why not?" "Because people died." The answer seemed obvious, yet Holmes waited. Jonathan continued. "Every time someone approached the truth, they disappeared." His gaze drifted toward the abandoned tracks. "I learned that lesson very young." A heavy silence followed. Then Holmes asked the question that had haunted the investigation. "What happened 23 years ago?" Jonathan closed his eyes briefly. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, softer, older, weighted by memory. "I was 11. The fog swirled around us. The abandoned station seemed to fade. Only the story remained. My father knew something was wrong." Jonathan's gaze remained fixed upon the darkness. He had discovered evidence. "Evidence of what?" asked Holmes. "The organization. The blackmail. The murders." He paused. He intended to expose everything. The familiar story, yet now we heard it from the witness himself. "The night he died," Jonathan continued, "he brought me with him." Holmes immediately looked interested. "Why?" "My father trusted no one. A reasonable precaution, considering what followed. We travelled to a warehouse." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "The original warehouse. Not Blackwater Lane. An earlier location. Long since vanished, perhaps." "What happened there?" Holmes asked. "I hid." The answer came quietly. "My father told me to remain hidden no matter what occurred." A long silence followed. Then I heard arguing. Several voices, 4 men, the founders, Ashcombe and the others. Jonathan nodded. "My father accused them. Of murder, of becoming murderers. The distinction mattered. The organization had crossed a line, and Jonathan Mercer had witnessed the moment." "What happened next?" Holmes asked. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "They killed him. No embellishment, no dramatic flourish, only truth, cold and simple." Inspector Finch lowered his head slightly. Even after all these years, the memory clearly remained painful. "Did you see who struck the blow?" Holmes asked. Jonathan nodded. "Yes." My pulse quickened. At last. The answer. The original murderer. The first domino. The beginning of everything. Who was it? Jonathan looked directly at Holmes. For several seconds neither man moved. Then he spoke. "Not Ashcombe." A surprising answer. Holmes remained silent. "Not the banker. Not the government advisor." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "It was the railway executive." The room seemed to freeze. Even the wind appeared to pause. Holmes nodded slowly. "Edward Markham." Jonathan looked startled. "You know the name. I found it yesterday. The surviving founder. The missing founder. The one individual absent from every recent event. A man scarcely mentioned throughout the investigation, and therefore perhaps the most dangerous of all. Markham killed my father." Jonathan's voice carried no anger now, only certainty. He ordered the cover-up. He ordered the disappearances. He created the witness list. Every revelation deepened the horror. 23 years, 23 deaths, all beginning with one man. Inspector Finch frowned. Then why kill Edwin Mercer now? Jonathan's expression darkened. Because Edwin found him. The answer landed heavily. Of course. Edwin had uncovered the truth, the investigation, the witnesses, the organization, and finally Markham himself. The consequence had been inevitable. Holmes remained thoughtful. Yet something still troubles me. Jonathan looked toward him. What? You knew all this? Yes. You possessed evidence. Some. You guided our investigation. Yes. Holmes nodded. Then why summon us tonight? The question hung in the air. Jonathan looked away. For the first time, uncertainty appeared upon his face. Then he answered, because I was too late. A chill passed through me. Too late for what? Jonathan reached into his coat. Slowly, carefully, he produced a folded document, then handed it to Holmes. The detective opened it. His expression changed instantly. What is it? I asked. Holmes handed me the page. My blood ran cold. The document contained a passenger manifest. Dated tomorrow, a special railway journey. 1 carriage, 1 passenger, 1 destination. And beside the passenger name appeared a signature, Edward Markham. The room fell silent. Jonathan spoke quietly. He's leaving England, Inspector Finch cursed. When? Dawn. From where? Jonathan pointed toward the tracks. A private rail terminal north of the city. The implications were immediate. If Markham escaped, 23 years of truth might vanish with him, perhaps forever. Holmes folded the document, then asked the final question. How do you know? Jonathan's expression became grim. Because he sent me an invitation. The answer puzzled everyone. An invitation? I asked. Jonathan nodded. He knows I'm alive. A heavy silence followed. He always knew. The realization struck like a hammer. 23 years. All this time, Markham had known. The witness had survived, and yet he had waited. Why? The answer arrived before anyone spoke it aloud. Because Markham no longer feared exposure. Because he intended to eliminate the final witness himself. Jonathan confirmed it. He wants me there, at dawn, to finish what began 23 years ago. Holmes stared into the fog. His expression had become very still. The case was no longer about solving a murder. The solution already existed. Now it was about stopping another one. And somewhere beyond London's sleeping streets, Edward Markham was preparing to board a train. Perhaps his last train. Perhaps the same train upon which Edwin Mercer had died. The final journey of a man who believed he had escaped justice. What he did not yet know was that Sherlock Holmes intended to be waiting for him. Chapter 11. The Last Departure. The hours before dawn have always possessed a peculiar quality. Night has not entirely surrendered. Day has not yet begun. The world seems suspended between two states. It was during those uncertain hours that we prepared for the final confrontation. By 3 o'clock, Holmes had assembled every significant figure remaining in the case. Inspector Finch, Arthur Bellamy, Jonathan Mercer, Lord Ashcombe, several senior officers from Scotland Yard. Even Ashcombe, now effectively a cooperating witness, agreed to accompany us. The aristocrat's reason was simple. 23 years ago, I lacked courage, he remarked quietly. I would prefer not to repeat the error. Holmes merely nodded. No one seemed inclined to argue. The private rail terminal lay beyond the northern outskirts of London. Officially, it served industrial freight traffic. Unofficially, it had long provided discreet transportation for individuals possessing sufficient wealth and influence. Precisely the sort of place Edward Markham would choose. We arrived shortly before 5 o'clock. The eastern horizon had begun to pale. A faint silver glow touched the clouds. The terminal itself appeared almost deserted. Several maintenance sheds, a small station building, 2 sidings, and upon the farthest track stood a train, a single locomotive. 3 passenger carriages. Steam drifted lazily into the cold morning air. Inspector Finch studied it through binoculars. "Someone's aboard." Holmes nodded. "Markham." "Certain." "No." The detective smiled faintly. "But I would be disappointed otherwise." We approached cautiously. Police officers spread throughout the area. Hidden positions had been prepared. Escape routes covered. Every reasonable precaution had been taken. Yet Holmes remained strangely thoughtful, not tense, not anxious, thoughtful, as though some final question still troubled him. At last I spoke. "You are uncertain." He glanced toward me. "About one matter." "Which matter?" "The method." I frowned. "The method, Mercer's murder." The answer surprised me. Jonathan identified the killer. "Indeed, we know the motive." "Certainly. Then what remains?" Holmes stared toward the train. "The most important question," I sighed, naturally, "which is, how?" The simplicity of the answer irritated me. "Does it matter?" Holmes looked genuinely surprised. "My dear Watson," his tone suggested I had asked whether oxygen mattered. "The method always matters." Perhaps he was right. He usually was. A whistle echoed across the yard. Movement appeared near the station building. A man emerged, tall, grey-haired, well-dressed. Even at a distance his bearing conveyed authority. Edward Markham, at last, the final founder, the architect of the conspiracy, the man whose decisions had produced 23 years of bloodshed. He walked calmly toward the waiting train. No guards, no companions, no visible concern. A man utterly convinced of his own security. Inspector Finch stepped forward. "Now?" Holmes raised a hand. "Not yet." Markham reached the platform, paused, looked around, then smiled. A strange smile. Not fear, not confidence, recognition, as though he had expected us all along. "Interesting," Holmes murmured. The old railway executive removed his gloves, then spoke. His voice carried surprisingly well. "Mr. Holmes." No one moved. Markham smiled again. "You may stop hiding." The statement produced immediate tension among the officers, yet Holmes simply stepped into view. "I dislike disappointing people." Markham laughed softly. "One of many admirable qualities." The 2 men faced one another across the platform. Neither seemed inclined toward haste. 2 chess masters approaching the final moves of a very long game. "I expected you sooner," said Markham. "I expected you later." The older man smiled. "A fair response." Inspector Finch advanced. "Edward Markham, you are under arrest for—" Markham ignored him completely. His attention never left Holmes. "You solved most of it." "Most." "Enough." Holmes folded his arms. "Then perhaps you would like to explain the remainder." The old man's smile widened. "Gladly." A remarkable answer. Most criminals denied. Markham appeared eager. Why? The answer became clear moments later. Because he no longer believed escape mattered. "I killed Jonathan Mercer." The words struck everyone like a physical blow. Jonathan himself stiffened. Markham continued. "Or rather, I believed I had." A silence followed. The old man looked toward Jonathan. "One of my few failures." Jonathan's expression remained unreadable. "Your father was more troublesome." Markham's tone remained disturbingly calm. "He possessed principles, as though that were a flaw. He threatened everything we built. Everything you corrupted," Ashcombe said coldly. For the first time, Markham glanced toward him. "Still pretending innocence, Ashcombe." The aristocrat said nothing. Markham looked back toward Holmes. "You know what interests me. I suspect you will tell me." The old man chuckled. "The train." His gaze shifted toward the waiting carriages. Everyone became obsessed with the train. The final carriage, the mystery, the impossible murder. He shook his head. Yet nobody understood its purpose. Holmes remained silent. The old man's eyes narrowed. "Except you." A long pause followed. Then Holmes nodded. "Yes. At last. The final piece. I watched closely. So explain it." Markham smiled. "Please." Holmes stepped forward. The dawn light was growing stronger. Shadows retreated gradually from the tracks. The final carriage was never the murder scene. Silence. Markham nodded approvingly. "Continue." Mercer was already dead. Inspector Finch stared. "What?" Holmes pointed toward the train. "The body was placed aboard afterward." The revelation struck everyone simultaneously. The scratches, the missing box, the moved evidence. Suddenly countless details aligned. "He died elsewhere," I said. "Exactly," Holmes continued. "The compartment was staged. The watch, the message, the body position. Everything." Markham applauded slowly. A chilling gesture. "Excellent." The old man looked genuinely impressed. Inspector Finch struggled to comprehend it. "Then where was he killed?" Holmes pointed toward the warehouse district, the original transfer point. "Blackwater Lane." Jonathan Mercer nodded slowly. "I suspected as much," Holmes continued. "Mercer discovered the witness ledger. The organization learned he knew. He was summoned to a meeting. Ashcombe closed his eyes, as though reliving the event. The meeting became an execution. The aristocrat nodded once. "Yes, no denial, no excuse, only truth." "And the method?" I asked. "The method remained hidden because everyone searched for poison or violence." Holmes looked toward Markham. "You used neither." The old man smiled. "No," Holmes continued. "Mercer suffered from a heart condition." Inspector Finch looked shocked. "The medical report mentioned that." "Indeed," Holmes nodded. "The condition was minor, but under sufficient stress, realization dawned." "My God," Holmes finished the thought. "He was frightened to death." The platform fell silent. No weapon, no poison, no wound, only terror, deliberately induced, deliberately exploited. Markham smiled. "The law has difficulty prosecuting fear." The statement was monstrous, and somehow that made it more revealing. Jonathan stepped forward. For the first time, anger appeared openly upon his face. "You murdered him." Markham shrugged. He chose curiosity. The response produced visible disgust even among the police. The old man looked genuinely incapable of understanding why. Then something changed. A faint sound echoed across the yard. A train whistle. Not ours. Another. Distant. Approaching. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "So?" Markham smiled. "You hear it." The old man reached into his coat. Officers instantly raised revolvers, yet he produced no weapon, only a watch, a silver pocket watch, identical to Mercer's, identical to the others, the final witness. He looked toward Jonathan, the final founder. He looked toward Ashcombe, the final detective. He looked toward Holmes. Then his smile faded, and for the first time I saw genuine exhaustion upon his face. 23 years. No one spoke. "Do you know what that feels like, Mr. Holmes?" The detective remained silent. Markham laughed softly, not with amusement, with weariness. "I no longer care who wins." The words hung strangely in the morning air, and for the first time since meeting him, Edward Markham looked less like a criminal mastermind and more like a man who had finally reached the end of a very long journey. Yet Holmes was watching him with unusual intensity, because something was wrong, very wrong, and Holmes had just noticed it. Chapter 12. The Man Who Was Already Dead. There are moments in an investigation when a detective suddenly perceives an invisible thread connecting events that had previously appeared unrelated. I witnessed such a moment upon the platform that morning. The instant Edward Markham withdrew the silver watch, Holmes's expression changed. Not dramatically, not enough for most observers to notice, but I had spent years studying that remarkable face. I recognized the look immediately. A final contradiction had revealed itself, and Holmes was following it toward the truth. The old railway executive stood motionless beside the train. Steam drifted around him. The dawn light strengthened steadily. Yet Holmes no longer appeared interested in arresting him. Instead, he studied him, carefully, relentlessly, like a physician examining symptoms. At last Holmes spoke. "You knew we would come." Markham smiled faintly. "Naturally. You never attempted to flee." "No." "You remained visible." "Yes." Holmes nodded. "Because escape was never your objective." The smile disappeared. For the first time that morning, uncertainty flickered across Markham's face. A tiny reaction, but enough. Holmes had struck something important. Inspector Finch frowned. "What are you talking about?" Holmes did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed upon Markham. "The train." "What about it?" asked Finch. "It is unnecessary." The inspector blinked. "Unnecessary? Entirely." Holmes pointed toward the waiting locomotive. If Markham intended escape, he would already be gone. A silence followed. The logic was undeniable. The old railway executive possessed money, influence, resources, countless opportunities, yet he remained here, waiting. Why? Holmes continued. The invitation to Jonathan, the deliberate clues, the meetings, the warehouse. He folded his arms. Everything has been arranged. A strange tension settled over the platform. Even Markham seemed interested. "Go on," Holmes nodded. "You wanted us here." The old man smiled again. "Perhaps." "No." Holmes's voice hardened. "Certainly." The smile widened. I felt a chill. The entire case suddenly seemed different. Not an investigation, a performance, a carefully orchestrated sequence of events. As though someone had been guiding us toward this exact moment. Jonathan Mercer understood it as well. His face had grown pale. "You planned this." Markham looked toward him. "Eventually." The answer seemed oddly phrased. Eventually. Not originally. Eventually. The distinction mattered. Holmes noticed. As always, something changed. The old man remained silent. After Mercer's death, still silence. After the witness ledger was discovered, nothing. Then Holmes spoke quietly. "You learned you were dying." The platform became utterly still. Markham's smile vanished. And in that instant, every remaining doubt disappeared. Inspector Finch stared. "Dying?" No answer. Jonathan looked stunned. Ashcombe slowly closed his eyes, as though confirming a suspicion long held. Holmes continued. "Not recently." The detective's voice remained calm. "Months ago." Still silence. "You discovered there would be no escape. No future. No continuation." Markham looked toward the rising sun. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then at last he laughed softly. A tired laugh. An old man's laugh. And in that moment he seemed 20 years older. Remarkable. The word carried no sarcasm, only admiration. "You always were the dangerous one." Inspector Finch stepped forward. "Is it true?" Markham ignored him. His attention remained upon Holmes. "How did you know?" Holmes answered immediately. "The watch." The old man raised an eyebrow. "My watch?" "Yes." Holmes pointed toward it. "You wind it every 4 minutes." Markham looked surprised. "A habit?" "No." Holmes shook his head. "A necessity." The detective stepped closer. "Your hands tremble. The skin beneath your eyes is yellow. Your breathing is shallow. The evidence accumulated relentlessly. A serious illness. A terminal illness." Holmes finished quietly. "And one that leaves little time." A long silence followed. Then Markham nodded. "Once. Only once. Yet it was enough." The revelation altered everything. Suddenly his actions acquired new meaning. The clues. The messages. The staged encounters. The apparent willingness to be found. All of it. A dying man no longer seeking victory. A dying man seeking conclusion. Ashcombe spoke softly. How long? Markham looked toward him. 6 months. The aristocrat lowered his head. No triumph, no satisfaction, only sadness. The feeling surprised me, until I remembered they had once been friends, before greed, before murder, before 23 years of lies. Holmes remained focused. Yet illness alone explains nothing. Markham nodded. Correct. Why now? The old man smiled faintly. Because Edwin Mercer succeeded. The answer startled everyone, even Jonathan. He uncovered the truth. Markham's voice had grown quieter. He found the witness list. He found the records. He found me. The old man looked toward the tracks, and when he did, I finally understood. A pause. Understood what? Holmes asked. That it was over. No one spoke. The simplicity of the statement carried immense weight. A lifetime of deception, a conspiracy spanning decades, and at last one determined man had reached the center. But you killed him. Jonathan's voice was cold. Markham looked toward him. Yes. No denial, no excuse, no attempt at justification, only truth. The honesty was somehow more disturbing than deception. Why? The question hung heavily in the morning air. Markham took a long breath, then answered, Because I was afraid. Silence. Not greed. Not power, not ambition. Fear. The oldest motive of all. For several moments nobody moved. Then Holmes asked the final question. The triangle. Markham looked surprised. The symbol. What about it? The meaning. At last. The mystery that had lingered from the beginning. The mark upon the carriage window, the brass token, the hidden messages, the forgotten investigation, everything connected to that simple shape. Markham studied the tracks for several seconds, then spoke. It was never an organization. The answer stunned everyone. What? Said Finch. The triangle. The old man drew the shape in the air with his finger. 3 lines, 3 promises. His voice had become distant, as though reciting something learned long ago. The first line, silence. The second, loyalty. The third, protection. Ashcombe laughed bitterly. What irony! Markham nodded. Indeed, the symbol had begun as an oath, a pledge between 4 ambitious men, and gradually transformed into something monstrous. The dawn sun finally emerged above the horizon. Golden light spilled across the station. Fog retreated. For the first time, everything appeared clear. No shadows, no mysteries, no secrets, only truth. Holmes folded his arms. So this is the end. Markham smiled. Yes. The old man glanced toward the train, then toward Jonathan Mercer. At length he reached into his coat. Police revolvers immediately rose. Careful, shouted Finch. Markham ignored them. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew a sealed envelope. Nothing more. No weapon, no threat. He handed it to Jonathan. The younger man accepted it cautiously. What is it? A confession. Jonathan stared. A complete confession. The old man's voice remained steady. Every crime, every witness, every name. Inspector Finch stepped forward. Why? Markham looked toward the rising sun, then answered quietly, Because someone should remember. The words carried unexpected sadness, not redemption, not forgiveness, merely exhaustion. A man finally unable to carry the weight any longer. For several seconds nobody spoke. Then Holmes suddenly took a step forward. His eyes narrowed. Markham. The old man looked up. You are still lying. A ripple of tension passed through the group. Markham smiled faintly. Am I? Yes. The detective's voice remained calm. There is one final deception. A silence followed. Even the birds seemed quiet. Holmes continued. You did not kill Edwin Mercer. The platform froze. Jonathan stared. Ashcombe stared. Inspector Finch stared. Markham himself stared. No one moved. No one spoke. The impossible statement echoed across the station. After everything, After all the confessions, after all the evidence, Holmes had just accused the confessed murderer of a different crime entirely. And judging from the look in Edward Markham's eyes, the detective had just uncovered the final secret of the case. Chapter 13. Murder on the Last Carriage. For several seconds after Holmes' declaration, nobody moved. The station platform seemed frozen in time. Steam drifted from the locomotive. The morning sun climbed steadily above the horizon, yet all attention remained fixed upon two men, Sherlock Holmes and Edward Markham. The old railway executive stared at Holmes with an expression I had not previously seen upon his face. Not fear, not anger, recognition. The look of a man who realizes the final lock has just been opened. At length Markham laughed, a soft laugh, a defeated laugh, and in that moment Holmes received his answer. "Extraordinary," said Markham quietly. The single word was confession enough. Inspector Finch recovered first. "What do you mean he didn't kill Mercer?" Holmes never took his eyes from Markham. "Exactly what I said. But he admitted it." "Indeed." "Then why would he confess?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Because he believed the truth no longer mattered." The inspector looked utterly bewildered. Jonathan Mercer seemed equally confused. Only Ashcombe appeared thoughtful, very thoughtful, as though an old suspicion had suddenly resurfaced. "Explain," said Finch. Holmes nodded. "Gladly." The detective stepped forward. "The entire investigation has suffered from one central assumption." "What assumption?" I asked. "That Edwin Mercer was murdered by the same person responsible for the original conspiracy." A silence followed. The logic was difficult to challenge. After all, every clue appeared to support it. The witness ledger, the archives, the threats, the hidden organization, everything pointed toward Markham. Everything, which was precisely why Holmes had become suspicious. "Consider the facts," Holmes continued. "Mercer discovers evidence." "Yes," said Finch. "He identifies Markham." "Yes." "He arranges meetings." "Yes." "He dies." The inspector nodded impatiently. "Obviously." "No." Holmes's voice sharpened. "Not obviously." The detective turned toward Markham. "Because Mercer died before he could reveal what he had learned." A pause. "And that fact changes everything." I frowned. "How?" Holmes looked toward me. "My dear Watson." He folded his arms. "What is the first principle of criminal investigation?" I considered. "The beneficiary." "Exactly." The detective nodded. "Who benefited from Mercer's death?" The answer seemed obvious. "Markham." Holmes shook his head. "No." A ripple of surprise passed through the group. The detective began pacing slowly. Mercer had already found him. His identity was compromised. His organization was collapsing. His health was failing. Holmes pointed toward Markham. The murder gained him nothing. A troubling silence followed. The logic was undeniable. Mercer's death had not prevented exposure. If anything, it had accelerated it. "Then who benefited?" asked Finch. Holmes stopped walking. "Someone else." The answer hung heavily in the air. Someone else. A second killer. A final betrayal, hidden beneath the larger conspiracy. Jonathan Mercer frowned. But who? Holmes looked toward Lord Ashcombe. The aristocrat met his gaze calmly. "Not me." "I know." "Bellamy?" "No." "Finch." The inspector snorted. "Thank you for the confidence." A faint smile crossed Holmes's face, then vanished. "The answer has been before us from the beginning." I searched my memory. The train, the messages, the witnesses, the warehouse. Nothing fit. Nothing. Then Holmes spoke a single name. Lionel Graves, the solicitor, the passenger from Huntingdon, the man who had overheard the argument. The room exploded with confusion. "What? Impossible. He came to us. He was threatened." Voices rose from every direction. Holmes waited patiently, then raised a hand. Silence returned. The threat was genuine. The argument was genuine. The fear was genuine. The detective nodded. Everything he told us was true. Inspector Finch stared. Then how? He simply failed to tell us everything. The answer struck like lightning, a half-truth, the most dangerous kind. Holmes continued. Recall his testimony. He overheard an argument. Yes. He heard a second voice. Yes. He claimed it came from the adjoining compartment. Holmes paused. An empty compartment. The realization hit me instantly. My God. Holmes nodded. Exactly. The adjoining compartment was empty. The records confirmed it. No passenger occupied it. No witness saw anyone enter. No one. Because the second voice had never come from the adjoining compartment. It had come from inside the same compartment. From Lionel Graves himself. Jonathan stared. He argued with Edwin. Yes. And lied about it. Precisely. The detective continued. Mercer trusted Graves. Why? Because Graves handled legal matters connected to several railway investments. The pieces began sliding into place. Not a random passenger, not a coincidence, a connection, a hidden one. Holmes reached into his coat. There he produced several documents recovered from the warehouse. I found these yesterday. The papers changed everything. Among Mercer's private notes appeared repeated references to Lionel Graves. Meetings, transactions, correspondence, financial investigations. The solicitor's name surfaced repeatedly, too repeatedly. He was involved, I whispered, deeply involved. Holmes nodded, far more deeply than he admitted. Markham watched silently. For the first time, genuine interest appeared in his eyes. He was hearing the solution as well. Holmes turned toward him. You didn't know? The old man smiled faintly. No. A remarkable admission. The architect of the conspiracy had not known the identity of Mercer's killer, because the killer operated independently, a separate betrayal, a personal crime hidden inside a larger one. Graves discovered something, Holmes continued. Something Mercer had uncovered. The witness ledger? No. The original murder? No. The detective's eyes narrowed. Money. Of course. Money. The oldest motive. Perhaps the simplest, yet often the strongest. Years earlier, Graves had secretly diverted funds connected to railway accounts managed through the final Carriage network. Small amounts initially, then larger ones, enough to accumulate a fortune, enough to destroy him if discovered. Mercer eventually uncovered the fraud and confronted him aboard the train. The argument, the fear, the hidden tension, everything suddenly made sense. What happened? Asked Jonathan. Holmes answered quietly. Mercer threatened exposure. Graves panicked. And then, the detective looked toward the train. Mercer's heart condition. A silence followed. The answer arrived. Not violence, not poison, not a weapon. Fear. The same weapon Markham had once employed. Graves knew about the condition. He exploited it. A carefully crafted threat. A revelation. A shock. Enough to trigger cardiac failure. Enough to kill. Inspector Finch stared. Good God. Holmes nodded. The irony is remarkable. The conspiracy did not kill Edwin Mercer. The man exposing the conspiracy did. A tragic truth. Mercer had survived decades of danger, only to be killed by a frightened accomplice trying to protect stolen money. Jonathan lowered his head. For several moments nobody spoke. Then Ashcombe broke the silence. Where is Graves now? Inspector Finch's face darkened. He disappeared yesterday. The answer explained itself. Once Holmes approached the truth, the solicitor had fled, not because he feared exposure to the conspiracy, because he feared exposure to murder. Holmes folded his arms. The clues were present from the beginning. The hidden argument, the false testimony, the missing details, the threat note. He smiled faintly. Even the threat itself. I blinked. What about it? The note warned him to remain silent. Yes. Holmes nodded. but only after he had already remained silent. The contradiction was obvious once spoken aloud. The threat served a different purpose. Not intimidation, cover, a convenient explanation, a way to disguise guilt. The mystery had finally unraveled. Every clue, every contradiction, every death, everything. The solution stood complete. Yet one final question remained. Jonathan Mercer looked toward Markham. What happens now? The old man gazed at the rising sun. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered softly, "The truth. No more, no less. The truth." Inspector Finch stepped forward. Officers approached. No resistance followed. No dramatic escape. No final confrontation. Only an old man surrendering to consequences delayed for 23 years. Markham handed over the confession. Ashcombe offered his testimony. Bellamy supplied the records. Jonathan Mercer provided the missing history. The conspiracy ended not with violence, but with evidence, exactly as Holmes preferred. As the officers escorted Markham away, the old railway executive paused. He looked back once, only once, toward Holmes. "You solved it." Holmes shrugged. "A matter of observation," Markham laughed softly. "No." His gaze drifted toward the tracks. "It was a matter of persistence." Then he disappeared into custody, and with him vanished the final shadow of a conspiracy that had haunted Britain for more than 2 decades. Later, as Watson and Holmes returned to Baker Street through the awakening streets of London, I reflected upon the strange journey. 23 years, 24 witnesses, 2 murders, 1 hidden organization, and a final killer concealed behind a larger crime. At length I spoke. "You knew before Hawthorne Station, didn't you?" Holmes smiled faintly. Mostly. The final 10% arrived this morning." I laughed. Only Sherlock Holmes would consider a complete solution 90% incomplete. The fog had finally lifted. Sunlight touched Baker Street. London appeared brighter, cleaner, freer somehow. As we climbed the familiar stairs to 221B, I turned toward my friend. "And the final carriage?" Holmes paused. "The final carriage?" The title of the case. A rare smile appeared. The last place anyone bothered to look. A fitting answer, because throughout the investigation, everyone had stared at the train. Yet the true mystery had never been hidden within the carriage at all. It had been hidden within the people. And as always, Sherlock Holmes had seen what everyone else had overlooked. The human heart. The end.